Hey, this is Warren Redlick. I want to go over an article by CNN criticizing Elon Musk and his views on population collapse around what looks like, in a lot of ways, a serious problem with human society, with women not having enough children, people not having enough children, and whether populations are going to collapse and what kind of problems that's going to create. CNN says it's not happening. Let's talk about it. Are you ready? Let's go. So, this article by Jen Christensen claims that demographers say it's not happening. I want to see, there's Elon's tweet. Elon tweeted, not for the first time, that population collapse due to low birth rates is a much bigger risk to civilization than global warming. And her response, climate change is a serious problem facing the planet, and experts say it's difficult to compare problems. Now notice, and then what she says, what is clear demographers say is that global population is growing. So a couple of things here. Experts say, demographers say. This is an appeal to authority, but it's like a vague, unclear authority. There's going to be some authority that's going to come out in the course of the conversation, but it's as if, well, I chose this expert, I chose this demographer, and this person says it's not a problem, so therefore Elon's wrong. Without actually analyzing the points that Elon has made multiple times before that I'm going to go through later in this video. So here we go down, and she says, this is from some demographer, a consulting demographer and former director of UN Population Division. We have no idea whether this is Joseph Chami. Is this guy really an expert? What level of expert is he? What expertise does he have? What makes him qualified to say this? What is his analysis really? So Joseph says he's better off making cars and engineering that are predicting the trajectory of the population. Well, first of all, Elon has a lot of critics say he isn't good at engineering or making cars, so I don't know where to go with that. But let's dive in a little further. He says, yes, some countries, their population is declining, but for the world, that's just not the case. It is true that world population is growing, and Elon has not said otherwise. The question isn't whether world population is growing, it's looking out into the future. What are the long-term prospects for population within individual countries and globally? So the world's population is projected to reach 8 billion by mid-November, around 8.5 billion in just 8 years. By 2080, the world's population is expected to peak at 10.4 billion. Now, I think there's some differences potentially in those numbers. I've heard other numbers where it peaks at 9 billion or even peaks at 8 billion. But if it's going to peak, that means it's going to start declining, as this says. It will begin to decrease by 2100. More conservative models anticipate the global population will be about 8.8 billion by 2100. So, okay, so you're at 10 billion over here, then you're at 8.8 billion here. And then it's true that what's driving current population growth is not a higher birth rate. What drives global population growth is fewer people are dying young, right? Okay, we're good so far. Global life expectancy's gone up. So if the existing group of people live longer and you have some births, then your population is going to grow. But the birth rate really matters a lot. And here it says, globally, the fertility rate has not collapsed, nor should it, according to the United Nations, but it has dropped significantly. Well, wait a minute, what's collapsed and what's dropped significantly? In 1950, women typically had 5 births each. Globally, last year it was 2.3 births. By 2050, the UN projects a further global decline to 2.1 births per woman. Well, that's less than half. That's a pretty big drop. I don't know how you categorize that as significantly versus collapsed. I would say going from 5 to 2.1 is a pretty big jump, a pretty big drop. But, you get into this, well, it hasn't collapsed, it's just dropped significantly. What does this mean? In some countries, it is lower. In the United States, it was 3.6 births per woman. It slipped to 1.6 in 2020. In Italy, it was 1.2. Japan, 1.3. China, 1.2. She's leaving out the worst stories, by the way. South Korea and Hong Kong are much, much lower. She's leaving that out. We're going to cover that in a couple minutes. In January 2022, China announced the birth rate fell for the 5th year in a row, even with the repeal of one-child policy, allowing couples to have up to 3 children as of 2021. Virtually every developed country is below 2, and it's been that way for 20 or 30 years, Chami said. Most countries have gone through what's called the demographic transition. Now, having a birth rate or fertility rate below 2 matters a lot, and I don't think CNN gets why this matters. The only continent that hasn't finished this transition is Africa, parts of Africa where there are 15 to 20 countries where the average number of children couples have is 5. But in those countries, children still face high death rates, infant mortality rate is 8 to 10 times higher. If women in these African regions had more access to contraception, education, and healthcare, these problems could be addressed and the global population could decline further, but people would be better off in terms of individual health. You notice we've gotten away from the question. There's this question, what happens with a lower birth rate? And they had Jen, the CNN author here, has not addressed this point. As more women got an education, worked outside the home, got a later start on children in many countries with access to contraception, couples had fewer children and the population started to decline. In 2020, the global population growth fell under 1% for the first time since 1950. That sounds like the population growth rate is declining and is going to go negative soon. In the US, the fertility rate is down in part due to what he characterized as a significant decline in teen births. Most demographers would see that as a good thing, he said. What does that have to do with demography? How is that a demographic issue? That it's good to have a decline in teen births? Why is that a good thing? I'm not saying, you might say from a moral perspective, you might say from your view on society, but how is that a good thing from a demographic perspective? That's not really explained. The other driver was a decline in the number of births to women in their 20s. Well, if teens are having fewer children and women in their 20s are having fewer children, well, that's a lot fewer children. And then something exacerbated the trend. Is it a collapse of the number of births? No, I wouldn't say that, Johnson said. Again, we're disagreeing about the meaning of collapse. And I don't think she's addressed in this article what the collapse story is, and I'm going to get to it. Few factors in play, fewer immigrants, more deaths as the population ages. It was almost like a perfect storm. Preventing population problems down the road. As the population ages and birth rates decline in some areas of the globe, that could put some strain on social systems. Really, that sounds like something Elon said. The share of the population over age 65 will rise from 10% in 2022 to 16% in 2050. That's twice the number of kids under age 5. I wonder if that could create social problems. What about who's going to pay for their care? Who's going to take care of them? Globally, the trick is to make such a population age imbalance work, is that governments will need to be proactive. Have you ever noticed that people think government is the solution to every problem? They never recognize that government might be the cause of some problems. Countries with aging populations will need to adapt public programs that will support this growing population of older people. Who's going to do the work? If you have more older people and fewer younger people, and the older people retire and don't do the work, and you need more stuff done to take care of the older people, if you have fewer younger people, who's going to do the work of taking care of the older people, and who's going to do the other work that we need done? This is why this matters. This means shoring up programs like Social Security, pensions, and establishing universal access to healthcare and long-term care. Seniors in the United States already have access to universal access to healthcare. We have Medicare. They already have Social Security. What do you mean shoring them up? What does that even mean? And giving them money doesn't solve the problem if the problem is you need work done. Okay, if the work needs to get, you can give them all the money in the world. If there's nobody to do the work, it doesn't matter. If the working age population shrinks and the retiring population grows, somebody has to do the work. And the more older people you have that need to be taken care of, the more people have to work to take care of them. And who's doing the other work? And, are people going to say, well, I want to take this job in manufacturing and make $30 an hour? Or do I want to work with old people making $12 an hour? These are problems, and they're not facing up to it. In the U.S., William Fry, a demographer and senior fellow with Brookings Metro, says he doesn't see the need for more couples to have more babies. Policies that would support couples that want children could help, but that hasn't made a big difference in terms of fertility rates. Exactly. It's not a money, but so many people disagree and say, oh, it's too expensive to have kids. That's not the problem. There's a cultural problem that people are choosing not to have children for a lot of different reasons, and including media like CNN lying that it's not a problem when it actually is a problem. Fertility is below the replacement rate in the United States, meaning couples are having fewer than 2 children each, but the rate is not as low as it is in most of Europe. I don't think in the US it's an issue of collapse, because we can certainly open the faucet for more immigrants anytime we want to. I don't know if you follow politics in this country, but there are some people who don't want more immigrants. Like, if we just get rid of those, and I'm personally an open borders guy, let them all come, right? I'm not talking about me. I got a lot of friends, and I know a lot of people out there who don't want more immigrants. And Japan doesn't want more immigrants, and they've got a population problem. I don't know how Korea feels about immigrants. They got a population problem. You can't just wave a magic wand and say we can have more immigrants. So you're going to tell the average American we're going to bring a bunch of people in from Nigeria, right? Nigeria is a high growth country. We're going to bring a bunch of people in from Nigeria, and they're going to solve all our labor problems. I don't think you understand the educational level of a lot of Nigerians. I don't think you understand their preparedness to work in the U.S. workforce. I don't know where you think these immigrants are coming from and what work they're going to do. I'm big on immigration. Let them all come, but you got to be realistic about what's going to happen. And a lot of Americans believe, I'm not sure I agree with this, but a lot of Americans believe that immigrants come in and they consume resources and they actually are a net negative for our economy. I actually think they're a net positive. That's a long conversation, but you're going to have to persuade people of this, and they don't agree with you. He says, we all have no paucity of people who want to come through the door to immigrate here in the future. Immigrants and their children are younger than the population as a whole, so that will help to keep the population from aging as well. Yeah, okay, but so what if your immigration thing doesn't go through? What if the immigration restrictions tighten? Then you have more of a population problem, right? Then you might have a population collapse problem, but we don't want to talk about that. And that's it. It's so thin. That's it. Now we get into, check out our other articles, blah, 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 blah. This is nonsense. This is not thoughtful. Jen Christensen, your article on this was not thoughtful. You did a very thin analysis. You basically said, let me say Elon's wrong in a headline and come up with some BS to support my BS story. So let's look at something else. This is the fertility rate globally. What's happened in the world. I want to show you, it's down to 2.4. So this leads to a growing population globally. The world population will grow as long as the global birth rate is over 2. What we have is Nigeria in particular and some other African countries have fairly large populations and they are growing fast. They are poor countries. They don't have a lot of education. They don't have a lot of contraception. Women don't have a lot of choices. And I suppose if your plan for keeping the world population growing is, let's keep Nigeria poor and uneducated, I suppose that's a plan. I don't know that sounds very liberal to me. That seems kind of like a dark, sinister plan. I don't know what you're thinking, but let's go deeper in here and let's talk about what are the birth rates. And I organized this by most recent value. So you can see South Korea, the birth rate is below, or fertility rate, whatever you want to call it, is below 1. Hong Kong, it's below 1. Puerto Rico, so I don't know why Puerto Rico is listed as a separate country, but Puerto Rico, I was surprised to see this. Puerto Rico is below 1. Singapore is near 1. Malta, Ukraine, Spain. Look at all these countries. And here's the thing. Every country that is below 2, their population is going to start shrinking soon, if it's not shrinking already. And in the long run, it's going to go to 0. This is the thing. This is an extinction event. This is Greece at 1.3, Japan at 1.3, Finland at 1.4, Poland, Belarus, Portugal, Serbia, Norway's at 1.5, Thailand is at 1. Think about that. Thailand, which I always thought of as a relatively poor country, Thailand is at 1.5. Germany's at 1.5. You know, all these countries in Europe at 1.5, 1.6. Cuba is at 1.6. If you go down this list and everybody's below 2, Costa Rica is a wonderful place to live, and people aren't having enough kids to replace the population. I'm going to explain this population shrinking in a minute. We get to 2 here, right? Malaysia, Uruguay, Bangladesh, and what you also notice is these red lines are the slope of their fertility rate, and the vast majority of these countries, it's declining. So all these countries that are 2 now, they're going to be below 2 soon. I mean, look at, Georgia, or look at El Salvador. El Salvador is falling. All these countries they're falling. Myanmar, Iran, Sri Lanka. These countries that are at 2 or slightly above 2, they're going to fall below 2 soon, if they're not already there, because this is 2020 data and we're in 2022. And recent public health events apparently reduced fertility rates in a lot of countries. So all these countries that are like 2 to 2.2, they're probably down below 2 already because of all the things that have happened recently. So what happens is you get down here and you start to get to some countries. The Philippines is at 2.5, so they're going to grow. Looking for big countries here. I guess Uzbekistan, Israel has a high fertility rate. I guess that's good news for Israel. Pakistan's a large country. They have a 3.4. Kenya's a large country. They have a 3.4. I think Nigeria is the big one down here. Afghanistan's at 4.2. If you can take a lot of countries and make them very poor and make them very secular and give them lots of contraception, Nigeria is a very large country. Nigeria is projected to be the largest country of the world in maybe 2100. China and India, their populations are going to fall, and Nigeria's population is going to grow very rapidly because they're a big country and they have 5.2 kids per woman. Although you can see that's also in steep decline. A lot of these countries that have high numbers, they're in steep decline. They're going to get it if the world can actually stop screwing over these countries and help them improve their economies, get their women educated, their population growth rates will grow. But let's go back to these countries up at the top, the ones with really low birth rates. So we're looking at South Korea, we're looking at Puerto Rico, or Puerto Rico's not really a country, looking at Spain, whatever. Here's the thing. If a country has, to oversimplify, if a woman has 2 children, you really need to have 2.1. It's complicated why, but if a woman, the average woman has 2 children, then the population stays basically steady state, right? If the average woman has 1 child, then the population halves every generation, right? Because you have a couple, right? If the couple has only 1 child, then the next generation there's 1 child instead of 2. There's 1 person instead of 2. And that person marries someone and they have a kid, and the population's a quarter, right? So if you have a fertility rate of 2, then there's a couple, they have 2 kids, they have 2 kids, they have 2 kids. So there's a reason why. I think it's because some people die before they get to fertility. So you really need 2.1, but to oversimplify, call it 2. Your steady state, if you're at 2 or it turns out to be 2.1, you know, each couple has 2 kids, they have 2 kids, that one has 2 kids, that one has 2 kids, and you just end up with a steady state. If it's 3, then each couple has 3 kids, then the next generation has 50% more. If each couple has 4 kids, then it's like 100% growth rate. So where we're at now is, for a large number of countries, we're well below 2. So if you have a population of 100 million people, and then you have a fertility rate of 1, the next generation by generation, your population is going to go from 100 million to 50 million to 25 million to 12 million to 6 million. Now, apparently CNN thinks that's not population collapse. I think it sounds an awful lot like population collapse. South Korea is already below 1, so they're actually going to collapse faster than I just described. Hong Kong, lower than 1, they're going to collapse faster than I just described. A lot of countries are going to trend down to 1 or lower. They're going to follow that path. And you're going to see populations of, countries that have 100 million people are going to have 50 million people. Then they're going to have 25 million people. Then they're going to have 12 million people. And globally, yes, it's possible that Africa will continue to grow. And, there will be some countries, like I think Israel, culturally, Israel women have a lot of children. The Orthodox Jews in particular have a lot of children. I think that some parts of the Muslim community, some parts of the Muslim world have a lot of children. It's cultural, it's religious, and that will probably continue for a long time. That will keep them above 2, and their populations will continue to grow. But in a lot of the world, this isn't going to happen, and you're going to see, and there's this cratering effect. If you go to a point where, your population falls from 100 million to 50 million to 25 million to 12 million, this is really pushing towards an extinction event. This is how population collapse does matter. And you can say it's no big deal, but 5 generations is 100 years, roughly 100 years. Maybe it's 120 years. That you can go from 100 million to 50 million to 25 million to 12 million to 6 million. So I would say if in 5 generations you go from 100 million to 6 million, that's a collapse. If you're saying, well, it's not a collapse this year, no one's saying the population is collapsing next year or the next 10 years. What Elon is saying, what is pretty obvious is, if large numbers of people decide not to have children, then over time the population will collapse. And if you don't think going from 100 million to 6 million in 100 years is not a collapse, I can't help you. I don't know what you're thinking. And what you end up with is you end up in a scenario where, and I get a lot of people saying, well, we'll just turn it around. How? Are you going to stop educating women? Are you going to go Handmaid's Tale? How do you turn this problem around? I don't think this is a problem that's easily turned around. This is a situation where you have population collapse, and it's really, ultimately, this is a question. Do you care about humanity? What you'll see is in the climate change movement and the environmentalist movement, it's like, we've got to save the earth. And as George Carlin would say, the earth is fine, the people are effed. Ultimately, what you'll see is, you will see environmentalists, you will see the left say that humans are bad for the planet. This is a pretty scary attitude about humanity. This is, like Elon is very pro-humanity, like the light of human consciousness. We want to spread the light of consciousness throughout the galaxy. We don't want the light of human consciousness. We don't want the candle snuffed out. A lot of these people do not care about the value of human consciousness, about the value of humanity. They are happy to see humanity go extinct and somehow the earth will be better off without us. And I personally think that the earth is nice, and that's great, and I think it's fine. I think people are massively overreacting to the danger of the planet. The planet will be fine. We are fleas on an elephant's butt. We like to think we have this huge impact on the planet. It's going to keep spinning. It's going to keep orbiting the sun. We're not going to be able to wreck the... I'm not saying we have zero impact, but I don't think our impact is nearly as big as people think it is. And the practical reality is you either value humanity or you don't. And fundamentally, these people view humanity as a bad rather than a good. They're more concerned about the climate than they are about the people. And Bjorn Lomborg would point out, Bjorn Lomborg from the Copenhagen Consensus would point out that more people are killed by cold than are killed by warm, and it's a big difference. That a warmer planet actually kills fewer people, it actually produces more food. There's a lot of advantages to a warmer planet. I don't think the planet is warming anywhere near as fast as anybody says. I don't think we're headed to any kind of catastrophe. I'm not saying that there's zero impact. I'm not saying there isn't something bad that's going to happen as a result of climate change. Climate change is going to happen. I'm just saying, do you really want the human population to head towards zero? And, you know, one of the things is we look at Elon Musk, and I love Elon Musk, and you look at Einstein, and you look at Steve Jobs, you look at these people who did wonderful things and created wonderful things that made life better for humanity. If you have fewer people, you have fewer great people. It's just a cold, hard reality. You know, you're not going to get, you know, you get someone like Elon Musk by having a lot of people. You get someone like Steve Jobs, you get someone like Albert Einstein. You get great people by having more people. If you have fewer people, you have fewer great people. Now, yeah, you have fewer evil people too, I suppose. But on the whole, I would say over the course of humanity, good has won out more than evil. And I want to see that continue. And this doomsday scenario, one of the things that happens is the negative attitudes of media like CNN and the environmentalists and the radical left, the negative attitudes telling people the world's a terrible place, humanity's terrible for the planet, don't bring children to this world. It's leading to, do you want humanity to go extinct? This is an extinction event. You either believe it or you don't. And if you take shallow analysis like you see from CNN here, if you take this kind of shallow analysis, then you're not going to get where you need to get. You're not going to see it. You're going to get lies. So that's it. I agree with Elon. Population collapse is a serious threat. We need more people to believe that humanity is is a good thing for the universe, for the world, etc. We need more people to believe. If you believe we're bad and you want us wiped out and you want the universe to go on to its cold, dead existence, okay. I believe that humanity adds value, that we make the world a more interesting place, that we're learning, we're discovering, we are reducing human suffering, we're actually reducing animal suffering, we're doing all kinds of great things. There's a lot of potential for us to make the world a better place in the future, to make the universe a better place in the future. And none of it's going to happen if humanity goes extinct. So please let me know what you think in the comments below. Please check out my other videos. Support this channel on Patreon, on Locals, or on the YouTube as a YouTube channel member. Check out the t-shirts. This is the Critical Thinking t-shirt, Discriminate Cogitandi. Check out the t-shirts at elonbits.com. Please subscribe, like, and share this video. Thank you so much for watching.